When I opened the door of the house I had spent $480,000 to buy for my daughter, and saw Eliza, my daughter, kneeling on the floor wearing a Reeves Household Staff apron, her hands trembling as she wiped the food her husband had just thrown, my heart cracked with a sound no one else could hear. He stood over her with his arms crossed, speaking in a tone that, even now, every time I remember it, makes me want to crush something in my hand. Clean it properly. Don't make me repeat the rules of this house in front of other people. In that moment, Eliza's eyes fell, and I stood in the doorway like someone who had come home far too late. And right then, I understood something I will never forget for the rest of my life. If I didn't pull my daughter back up, no one else would. And this is the story of the day I took back her light. If just one sentence, one image, one feeling in this passage tightens your chest. If you've ever watched someone you love get pushed down so far they no longer recognize themselves, leave a single. So I know that somewhere out there, someone understands why I stepped into this fight. And if you want to walk with me on the journey to pull Eliza out of the dark, hit subscribe. Thank you truly for spending a few seconds standing with me at the doorway of Meadowlark. I left Colorado on a morning that smelled of slightly burnt coffee and melting sidewalk snow. 9 years later, I returned in the scent of jet fuel, road dust, and that strange feeling only people who've been gone too long understand. Like you're coming home and stepping into someone else's home at the same time. My name is Marin Thorne, 63 years old, a retired project manager who spent a lifetime working with schedules, timelines, blueprints, and numbers. I managed highway projects, water treatment plants, and residential developments all over Colorado. People used to say I had one ability: look at a blueprint and know which structure would stand and which would crack sooner or later. The irony is that during all that time, I failed to see one thing. My own daughter's life was cracking slowly. 9 years ago, when I accepted a long-term contract in Seattle, I did something I thought was the wisest decision of my life. I sold my old house in Longmont, gathered almost all my savings, and bought for Eliza, my daughter, a white 2-story house in Louisville at 2477 Meadowlark Lane. The price at the time was $480,000. I remember it clearly because I signed the transfer with a hand that shook. "This is your home," I told Eliza the day she received the keys. "No matter what happens, you and your family will always have a place to come back to." Eliza hugged me, tears smudging my glasses. The sun covered the porch. The neighbor's glass wind chimes rang, and I thought I had built something sturdier than any bridge I had ever supervised, my child's future. Then Seattle called. The project was too big, too tempting, full of emails lined with figures and budgets. I left. 1 month, then 1 year, then 9 years. I visited a few times, but the trips grew shorter, and the video calls filled with "I'm fine, Dad. Don't worry." Until one day, that reassurance began to show tiny cracks. Calls cut off, voices sounded held back, and Eliza's eyes shifted whenever a door opened behind her. Something wasn't right, but the distance between Seattle and Louisville was always just enough for me to convince myself it was only stress, only exhaustion, only kids, until I decided to end my Seattle contract earlier than planned. No email, no message, just a plane ticket, a suitcase, and one thought: this time I won't ask through a screen. I will see with my own eyes. The taxi left the highway and turned into the familiar streets of Louisville. March snow had melted, and patches of brown grass were beginning to turn pale green. House number 2477. Meadowlark appeared at the curve of the road, still the gray roof, still the white fence, still the maple tree I had planted years ago. I asked the driver to stop a little ways back so I could breathe. From the back seat, I looked through the window. The living room curtains were half drawn, warm yellow light spilling through. A silver SUV I didn't recognize sat in the driveway, taking the spot where Eliza used to park her old sedan. "Do you want me to wait?" the driver asked. I shook my head. "No need, this is my house." The words slipped out a little too fast, like a reflex. But as I stepped onto the street, I suddenly realized, yes, I bought this house. Yes, it was under Eliza's name. But I was nothing more than someone coming back far too late. The evening wind carried the smell of damp soil and a hint of smoke from whatever the neighbor was grilling in their backyard. I pulled my collar up and walked slowly along the fence. Each step, each crunch of gravel under my shoes made my heart beat a little harder than usual. Not because of Colorado's altitude, but because of what waited behind that door. I slipped my hand into my jacket pocket and touched the old key. There was a scratch on its edge, the one Eliza once teased me about. "Dad, you're really keeping that awful old key?" I smiled to myself, then slid it into the lock. The lock didn't click. The door opened smoothly, as if I had only been gone since yesterday. The first smell that hit me wasn't scented candles or coffee, but cold food, slightly sour, mixed with something faintly like cheap cleaner. From inside came the sound of dishes clattering hard, followed by a man's voice, low and sharp, so clear it made the hair on my arms stand up. "Clean it properly. Don't make me repeat the rules of this house in front of other people." I froze in the doorway. The surprise I had rehearsed from the airport to here crumpled in my throat like a sheet of paper being crushed. The man's voice rang out again, this time with the slam of something hitting the table. "Look at this mess. You've wrecked my whole house." I stepped inside as my eyes adjusted to the warm yellow light. The living room was still the same layout. The old second-hand sofa I once bought was still there. But something felt off. The family photos on the wall were no longer straight. One frame was tilted badly, like no one had bothered to fix it. From the dining room, I saw Eliza. My daughter was kneeling on the wooden floor, bare hands picking up pieces of a shattered bowl scattered across the ground. On her chest was a dirty gray apron with neatly embroidered letters, Reeves Household Staff. Not a kitchen apron with Home Sweet Home. Not a cute Bless This House, but an apron stitched clearly like an order, Household Staff of the Reeves family, inside the very house under my name. Behind her on the dining table, a bowl lay overturned, food splattered across the tablecloth. Leaning against the table was a man I had only seen through a screen, Clayton Reeves, Eliza's husband. He was half a head taller than me, broad-shouldered, hair neatly slicked back, holding a beer in his hand. His face was twisted in anger, but the moment he noticed me, every crease vanished like someone flipped a switch. "Dad?" He set the beer down, didn't bother to soften the clatter, and smiled so brightly that if I hadn't just heard his "Don't make me repeat the rules," I might have believed it. "You're back? Why didn't you tell us so we could come pick you up?" Eliza startled and looked up. In the moment her eyes met mine, there was nothing but fear. Then, just as quickly as someone draws a curtain, she forced a thin, brittle smile. "Dad," her voice was soft, dry. "You're home. Why didn't you text first?" In the corner of the room, a small head peeked out from behind Eliza's leg. Wide, dark eyes stared straight at me. June, my granddaughter, 5 years old, but this was the first time we'd met outside a screen. "June," Eliza whispered, reaching behind her protectively. "Say hello to Grandpa, sweetheart." The child didn't speak. She stepped back, gripping the dirty apron at her mother's waist, looking at me like I was a stranger barging into the house. A faint sound outside the window made me glance over. Through the large front window, I saw Helen, the neighbor, standing under her porch light, holding a trash bag, her eyes locked on the sight of Eliza kneeling. No one spoke, but that single look alone turned the moment into true humiliation. "We were just doing a bit of housework," Clayton said, his tone suddenly gentle. He walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder, as if we'd known each other for years. Eliza, clumsy as always, dropped a bowl, so I told her to clean up to remember. "You know your daughter. Still, scatterbrained like before." I looked at Eliza's hands. Her fingers were trembling. On her ring finger was her simple wedding band. A tiny bead of blood was seeping from between her fingers, mixing with water and cleaner on the floor. Stand up, I said, stepping farther into the room. This wood floor, your favorite when you first moved in, remember? Wash your hands before picking anything else up. Eliza bowed her head even lower, like someone trying to disappear. She hurriedly placed the shards onto a plastic plate, then stood, adjusting her apron and sleeves as if to hide something. Clayton laughed, unashamed, carefree. You still fuss about everything, Dad. It's just the floor. The bowl matters more. Come on, Eliza. Take that apron off. You're scaring him. He spoke, but his eyes never left me. The look of someone used to controlling others, calculating whether I was someone he could push. Eliza bit her lip and fumbled with the apron strings. When she raised her arm, her sleeve slipped just enough to reveal her left wrist, where a long bruise wrapped around in the shape of fingers gripping hard. I had seen marks like that on construction sites, but never imagined I would see them on my daughter. What's that? I asked, my voice dropping. Eliza jerked her hand back, yanking the sleeve down so fast she nearly dropped the plate. She forced a misplaced smile. It's nothing, Dad. I got it caught in a cabinet door. Clayton stood behind her, only 3 steps away. He didn't speak, but the sharpness in his eyes, the kind of eyes belonging to someone who believes they own another person, made Eliza shrink instinctively. I realized then she wasn't afraid of me. She was afraid of him. Clayton burst into a loud laugh. See? She's clumsy, always bumping into things. Then he stepped closer, placing his hand on my shoulder again, this time with a firmer squeeze, like a warning not to interfere. You must be tired from the trip. Let us handle everything. Why don't you sit down? I can get you a Colorado craft beer. After all, we're family. Family. I looked at the cold beer on the counter, the apron tossed onto the chair, the tiny drop of blood on the floor, Eliza avoiding my eyes, and the left wrist whose bruise still showed beneath thin fabric. This wasn't a crack anymore. This was the sign of a bridge about to collapse if I didn't act now. Clayton left the house about 30 minutes later, saying he had to hit the gym and prep for a Zoom meeting tonight. He gave June a careless kiss and closed the door a little too hard, like a message to whoever was left inside. Don't cross the lines he'd drawn. When the sound of his engine faded along curved Meadowlark Lane, the house fell into the kind of silence I hate most. The silence of things hidden so long they turn into shadows in every corner of the walls. I stood in the kitchen, Eliza just 1 step away, her hands gripping the edge of her pants as if holding herself together. Tell me, I said, my voice light but not soft. You don't need to choose your words. Just be honest. Eliza swallowed hard. When she looked up, her eyes no longer dodged mine. They were simply empty, the kind of emptiness that comes from living too long in the dark. Dad, she said, and her whole body collapsed into the chair like her strength had drained out. I pulled out a chair and sat beside her. I didn't touch her. I know that for people who've been controlled for too long, even a gentle touch can crack them open, but Eliza had gone past that. She didn't cry. She broke. After I had June, she said, her voice thin like a draft slipping under a door, I got really bad. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I just held the baby and shook. Clayton said I was weak and that I needed medication. He called a private doctor his family knows. I leaned slightly. The doctor's name? Dr. Halvors, Eliza said. I recognized the name, tied to an overprescription case in public records a few years back. Eliza continued. He put me on something strong. Really strong. I don't remember the first 3 days. I just remember Clayton bringing me stacks of papers, saying they were temporary authorizations, insurance forms, housing agreements. He said it was all to manage things because I wasn't stable. I signed them. A chill crawled up my spine. Eliza, what exactly did you sign? She shook her head like someone trying to drag memories up from a muddy lake bed. When the meds wore off, I asked him. Clayton said they were just combined insurance documents. I didn't dare ask again. I just didn't want him angry. I needed the truth cleanly. Where are those papers? Eliza pointed to a small drawer under the kitchen counter. In there. I stood, opened the drawer. Inside were not a few loose sheets, but an entire file. A thick stack bound in a blue folder, labeled in bold letters. Reeves Family. Home Management. Signed consent files. I pulled it out and set it on the table. As soon as it hit the surface, the kitchen light flickered once, the warm glow shifting momentarily into a cold bluish white, the kind of storm arc moment life sometimes gives you right before everything collapses. I opened the first page, and my heart dropped a level. It wasn't temporary authorization forms. It wasn't insurance paperwork. It was a notarized property transfer signed by Eliza, transferring ownership of the house to Clayton Reeves. I stared at her signature. It was sloppy, slanted, nothing like the way Eliza had signed her name all her life. Beneath it was a note from the notary. Client appeared medicated but coherent. I cursed silently. One simple sentence that can destroy someone. Medicated but coherent. The perfect excuse to legitimize coercion. I don't remember signing this, Eliza whispered. Dad. I don't remember anything. I turned the page. Receipts for materials and renovations. New wood floors, new paint, new kitchen cabinetry, all under Clayton's name. Invoices for plumbing, electrical work, also under Clayton's name. The City of Louisville's permit applications for home renovations. Representative, Clayton Reeves. Total cost, $38,800. All of it labeled as primary homeowner. I understood immediately. This was a very common house seizure tactic. The person trying to take the property puts their name on every repair invoice, so when a dispute happens, they can say, I invested in the house. I am the one who maintains it. I am the true owner. And Eliza, drugged on strong medication and living in fear, had been pushed into exactly the position he wanted. I closed the file. Did Clayton threaten you? Eliza nodded. He said, if I tried to take June away, he'd tell DSS I was mentally unstable, that he'd take her from me. I looked straight into my daughter's eyes. Eliza, does he hit you? Eliza bit her lip until it bled. A single tear fell. Not at first. My heart tightened like a cable pulled too hard. And now? Eliza slowly lifted her left hand and pulled up her sleeve. The bruise I'd seen earlier wasn't the only one. Around her wrist was a longer, darker arc, exactly the shape left when someone grabs hard and twists another person's arm. I tried to hide it, because of June. Little June stood at the living room doorway, hugging an old stuffed bear, her eyes wide. She didn't cry, but her expression said something that hurt more than anything else. She was used to this. I lowered myself to Eliza's eye level. Listen to me. You're not crazy. You're being controlled, and you are not the one doing anything wrong. Eliza trembled violently. Dad, what if I lose the house? I looked around at everything. The dining table I once assembled, the doorframe I painted, the maple tree in the yard I planted with my own hands. I said slowly, this house was never his, and he's not going to keep it much longer. Eliza bent toward the drawer again. She pulled out a thick brown envelope and slid it toward me with shaking hands. Dad, she said, I kept what's left of this house. I looked at the envelope. Heavy, old, the edges were worn. A faint line of ballpoint pen read, 2477 Meadowlark. Original records. I didn't open it, but just touching it, I knew. Inside were things no one had shown me, and possibly the things that would break apart the entire story Clayton had built over the years. That night, after Eliza had fallen asleep, I sat alone in the dining room, with nothing but the cold, trembling yellow light on the ceiling. My years as a project manager taught me this. When everything looks fine, there is always a document hidden somewhere. I opened my laptop, took out my notebook, and wrote on the first page, Case File, Meadowlark 2477. The next morning, I walked along Meadowlark Lane to find the things Eliza hadn't dared to say. The first to speak was Mr. Bergman across the street. He removed his headphones and said quietly, "I once saw that Clayton yelling at Eliza in the yard, gripping her arm so hard I thought he'd snap it." Then came Brandon, the USPS worker. "I saw her 3 times wearing that Reeves Household Staff apron. I thought she was the maid." But the way the whole neighborhood stayed silent was the deepest cut of all. They all saw, and they all chose to look away. When Eliza left for work, I reopened the envelope. Date of the house transfer, March 14th. Date her medication dosage increased, March 14th. Sertraline plus clonazepam plus quetiapine, a trio that makes it hard for a person to read a single line, let alone understand legal contracts. I logged into the Colorado healthcare system using the old record code I still had. Everything matched. The doctor's note said Eliza was in a cognitive fog, had poor comprehension, and needs supervision. Reeves didn't just know that. He waited for the exact day she was at her weakest to push the transfer documents in front of her. In another folder, I found a copy of a loan agreement from Frontier Community Bank. Loan $160,000, collateral 2477 Meadowlark Lane. Applicant, Clayton Reeves. He had used Eliza's house as collateral for his private business loan. If payments were late, the bank would seize the property. Eliza would lose everything. I gathered all the documents, placed them into a hard folder, and labeled it Evidence Pack, Reeves Fraud, Property Abuse. The kitchen light flickered again. In my line of work, a flickering light means wiring is about to burn. In life, it means a storm is coming. I stood up, locked the file, and whispered the sentence I knew would change the entire story. To save my daughter, I have to meet her doctor. I have to prove that March 14th was the day she legally had no capacity. I looked at the file in my hand and knew. From this moment on, I wasn't investigating as a desperate father anymore. I was investigating as a man with evidence, and Clayton Reeves had just chosen the worst opponent of his life. That night, I hadn't planned to take Eliza to the hospital until I flipped through the papers in the third kitchen drawer. While searching for the home repair invoices under Reeves's name, my hand brushed against a wrinkled envelope shoved crookedly into the corner. The UC Health Longs Peak logo was smudged but unmistakable. Inside was a discharge summary from 2 years ago, clipped together with an old prescription list, sertraline, clonazepam, quetiapine, all signed by the attending doctor. I looked at Eliza. She lowered her head, but when I gently asked, "You were admitted there, weren't you?" She nodded and spoke like someone remembering through fog. "I only remember the cold white lights and the smell of antiseptic." That alone was enough. I connected the fragments. If I wanted the truth, if I wanted proof she had been forced to sign while incapacitated, I had to take Eliza back to the place where she had fought alone without me ever knowing. The next morning, Clayton left the house early as usual, barely out the door before shouting back at Eliza to finish cleaning before 8. He didn't look at us, didn't even notice I was still there. The moment his car disappeared around the corner, I helped Eliza with her coat, sent June to the neighbor's house, and guided my daughter to the car. Only after the door shut and the safety lock clicked did Eliza look at me with the eyes of someone waiting for someone. Anyone to finally help her escape. I drove Eliza to UC Health Longs Peak, the same place I once took Marianne for her heart checkups years ago. Cold white hallways, the familiar antiseptic smell, the LED lights reflecting off our footsteps as if the whole hospital were watching the story I was about to dig into. Dr. Alana Meredith appeared behind the glass door, small frame, sharp eyes, the kind of person who has seen too many cases where family pain was caused by those closest. She glanced at Eliza, then at me, as if already knowing who needed to speak. I introduced myself, told her plainly that I was Eliza's father, and that I needed to know her exact mental state at the time she was forced to sign legal documents. Dr. Meredith led us into a consultation room, turned on the screen, and pulled up Eliza's medical file from 2 years earlier. I saw the date, the exact day Eliza signed the house transfer to the Reeves family, and then I saw the slanted handwriting in the medical notes. Unable to provide informed consent. Severe cognitive fog. Dr. Meredith folded her hands, her voice even and final. Mr. Marin, at that time Eliza was not capable of signing any legal paperwork. She was in severe postpartum cognitive impairment, worsened by medication prescribed by a private doctor. My jaw tightened. Medication from a private doctor? She nodded. Sertraline, clonazepam, quetiapine, high dosages. Not suitable for someone postpartum. We had to lower the dosage immediately when she was admitted. Before I could respond, a soft voice came from behind. I remember Eliza. Nurse Rachel stepped in. Young face, but eyes that weren't. The eyes of someone who has stood beside patients in their darkest days. She recognized us instantly and said something that made my blood run cold. One day we asked her what month it was, and she said baby month. I saw Eliza drop her head, her hand clutching my sleeve like a child, afraid of being taken from her mother. I asked, her cognitive state? What was it like then? Rachel looked at me, voice soft but steady. For 3 days straight, she couldn't remember her own name. It's documented. I couldn't speak. I didn't need to. Dr. Meredith placed the file in front of me and pointed to the signature line. The day she signed the house transfer matches exactly the 3 days she had no decision-making capacity. I looked at my daughter, pale, red-eyed, but looking at me like someone finally pulled out of the water after years of drowning. No more guessing, no more doubt, no more fog. Everything was clear. Eliza signed those documents while legally incapacitated. Those contracts, under Colorado law, are void. Dr. Meredith signed the professional evaluation and placed it in my hand. If you intend to pursue legal action, this is the strongest evidence you have. Rachel stood beside her and whispered, "Please take her out of there. If not, next time she'll be admitted in worse condition." I nodded. The whole hospital seemed to fall silent. And as I rested my hand on Eliza's back to help her stand, I knew this battle had only just begun. I looked at the evaluation signed in blue ink, and in that moment I understood. This was no longer a family matter. This was a case. I left UC Health Longs Peak with the thick file in my hand and a coldness I can't fully describe. Not the cold of early winter Colorado, but the cold that comes when the truth has just been exposed. I knew I couldn't pull Eliza out of the hole Clayton and the Reeves family had dug alone. I needed someone who understood the law, who understood the kind of invisible violence that leaves no wounds on the skin, but leaves scars on ownership, on freedom, on dignity. I needed a lawyer, and not an ordinary one. Someone who had handled cases of exploitation so subtle, the abuser never had to raise a hand. Only papers, tone, and family power. The first name that came to mind was Gabrielle Ivers, one of Boulder's top attorneys for exploitation of vulnerable adults, coercive control, and the quiet forms of domestic manipulation no outsider ever sees fully. I knew of her through a former colleague at City of Boulder Housing, someone who once told me a sentence I never forgot. If someone tries to strip a woman's rights without leaving bruises, Gabrielle will see straight through it. I called ahead. She told me to come immediately. Her office sat in an old building on Pearl Street, red brick walls, inside smelling of coffee mixed with paper and the faint warmth of legal documents still fresh from the printer. She stepped out to greet me, hair tied back, eyes not the cheap sympathetic kind, but the sharp observational kind, like an engineer identifying cracks in a bridge. I set the medical file on her desk. She opened each page, not rushing, not offering filler words, just marking lines with a pencil. Unable to provide informed consent, severe cognitive fog, medication interaction. "Mr. Marin," she said, her voice slicing through the air, This isn't family conflict. This is exploitation of a vulnerable adult. I nodded. She continued. And not only that, this is coercive control. They isolated her, controlled finances, manipulated her, threatened to take her child. And the house transfer is a fraudulent conveyance because the victim had no legal capacity. And lastly, she slid the Reeves Household Staff apron file toward me. This is a civil labor violation. They turned your daughter into unpaid labor in her own home. I said nothing. Every word she spoke was another nail in the coffin the Reeves family had built for themselves. Gabrielle stood, walked to the glass board behind her desk, and began writing with a marker. A 4-tier plan. She wrote each section like an architect, laying the foundation for a structure I knew would crush the Reeves family. Tier 1. Emergency residential order for Eliza. We stop Reeves from kicking them out. Since the house is legally in her name, the court will grant an emergency residency order within 24 hours. Tier 2. Freeze Reeves's assets. We'll request the court freeze Clayton's personal assets and the business account funded by the $160,000 loan he secured using this house as collateral. Once their access to money collapses, their control collapses. Tier 3. File to void the transfer. With Dr. Meredith's UC Health records and cognitive evaluation, the court will void the entire transfer and every related document. Tier 4. Sue Reeves for forced labor plus coercive control. This is the heavy tier. If we prove they forced her into unpaid labor and use threats to control her, we don't just take the house back. We pursue civil damages. Gabrielle looked at me, not asking for permission, but confirming whether I had the resolve to follow this path. I looked at the file, at Dr. Meredith's blue ink signature, at the fear in Eliza's eyes these past days, and I knew hesitation was no longer mine to have. This tier, Gabrielle said, tapping the final line, will hit them where people like the Reeves family can't stand to be hit. Money and reputation. She tapped her fingers on the desk, each tap precise and cold, like striking the nerve of a sleeping predator. In the next 72 hours, she said, meeting my eyes, we are going to strike exactly where they're weakest. Money and reputation. The things the Reeves family believed they owned forever, until the day they touched my daughter. I don't like pulling my daughter into the center of a storm, but Gabrielle was right. If you want the other side to reveal their true nature, go to the place where they think they're strongest. For the Reeves family, that place was Reeves Ranch, a house nearly 2,000 square meters wide, shiny on the outside and rotting on the inside from generations of arrogance. We arrived on Saturday afternoon. The timing, Gabrielle said, was perfect. They usually gather as a family on this day. The more people, the easier it is for cracks to show. And just as she predicted, as soon as our car rolled through the gate, I saw 4 SUVs lined up, lights glowing throughout the house, voices and laughter spilling in from the backyard patio. I gave Eliza's hand a light squeeze. She nodded, eyes a little red, but no longer shaking like the day before. The door opened. Clayton appeared first. He wore the kind of smile I've seen on men who live their lives by controlling others. A polite, wide smile that never touches the eyes. "You're here early, Dad," he said smoothly, as if he hadn't forced Eliza to kneel and scrub the floor yesterday. I didn't answer. Gabrielle walked straight into the house, brushing past Clayton as if he were nothing more than a piece of furniture in the way. In the living room, the entire Reeves family had gathered. His father, his mother, his 2 sisters, an aunt, and a few kids running around. When Eliza stepped inside, the room fell silent for half a second, the kind of silence I've seen in tense board meetings. Everyone looking, everyone knowing something is wrong, but no one daring to say it. Public humiliation, Tier 2, began from that very silence. Everyone stared at Eliza as if she were a housemaid who had wandered into the party. Miranda Reeves, Clayton's mother, stepped forward. Her face carried that mix of pity and disdain. "Eliza," she said in the tone one uses to remind a child of their place. "You should know your position when you're in this house." I heard Eliza swallow, but Gabrielle didn't let her bow her head. She set her briefcase on the glass table. "Her position," Gabrielle said, voice calm and sharp as a scalpel, "is the legal owner of the house in Louisville, the one your family used to secure a $160,000 loan." The room froze. Clayton tried to smile, but the corner of his mouth twitched. "That's just a misunderstanding. We were helping Eliza manage—" Gabrielle opened the file. "Helping her by forcing her to sign while on high postpartum doses of sertraline, clonazepam, and quetiapine? Helping her by threatening to take her child? Helping her by turning her into unpaid domestic labor?" Miranda Reeves went pale. Clayton's father snorted, ready to argue, but Gabrielle didn't slow. "I've already filed for a temporary asset freeze," she continued. "By tomorrow morning, the court will review it. If you don't cooperate, the company accounts and personal accounts will be audited for source of funds." Clayton's sisters began whispering loudly. One blurted out, "It's not our fault. Eliza signed it. She signed because we were helping take care of her baby." The sentence flew out so fast that the whole room froze again. Eliza stared at the floor. Clayton whipped around toward his sister, face drained of color. Gabrielle raised an eyebrow, the expression of someone who had just heard a confession worth gold in a legal case. "Thank you," she said. "That statement alone is enough for the court to identify coercive control and exploitation of a cognitively impaired person." I didn't have to say anything. Neither did Eliza. The entire room stood still like they'd heard glass cracking under their feet. Gabrielle gathered the documents, locked her case, and stood. "You have 48 hours to think," she said clearly. "After that, we will see you in court." Then she turned to Eliza, placing a gentle hand on her back, as if to remind her that this time she didn't have to stand alone. As we stepped out the door, I heard Clayton shouting after us, "You don't have the guts to take this to court." Gabrielle turned her head, a thin smile sharp as a blade. "See you Monday." The door closed, and for the first time in years, Reeves Ranch fell truly silent, silent the way a household becomes when it finally senses the shadow of justice approaching. 48 hours passed without a single response from the Reeves family. Not one phone call, not one email, not one attempt to negotiate. Only a thick silence, the kind used by people who believe they are rich enough, connected enough, and prestigious enough to make the entire world bow to them. They didn't understand that attorney Gabrielle Ivers did not belong to that world. At 8 o'clock on Tuesday morning, she hit send on the press release from her silver laptop, sitting right at my kitchen table, the place where the entire plan began. Within 10 minutes, the Boulder Daily Camera responded. By 9:30, the story was on the front page. Louisville mother forced to sign over home during severe cognitive impairment. Legal expert calls it fraudulent conveyance. The photo was of the Meadowlark 2477 house, the one I bought for Eliza, taken from the corner of the street, sunlight splitting the front of the house like a verdict. The hashtag Chach Justice for Eliza Thorne began appearing on Twitter. At first, just a few dozen people, old co-workers of mine in Seattle, Eliza's high school friends, a few parent groups in the area. But then the algorithm noticed something, a heartbreaking story, a young mother trapped by soft coercion, a powerful family thinking they could swallow the entire estate of a postpartum woman. By the afternoon, the hashtag had spread across all of Colorado. I stood on the porch watching neighbors gather in small clusters. No one dared speak loudly, but everyone looked toward Reeves Ranch, the way people look at a crack newly exposed in broad daylight. Someone whispered, "I once saw Clayton yelling at Eliza right in the yard." Another lifted her toddler and shook her head. "I thought she was just doing extra housework." Who knew? They didn't laugh. They didn't gossip. It was real anger. a community realizing a woman had been harmed right inside their peaceful neighborhood. Around 4 in the afternoon, the group Women's Haven Boulder appeared at my doorstep with signs and warm bread. They said a sentence that made Eliza burst into tears right on the porch steps. "We are here to protect you." That evening, the Colorado Housing Association issued an official statement calling Eliza's case a textbook and dangerous example of fraudulent conveyance disguised as family care. When a major organization uses the word dangerous, it means this has gone far beyond a civil dispute. It means the entire state is watching. It means the Reeves family has just become the center of public outrage. Gabrielle placed her hand on my shoulder. "We're just waiting for the emergency order now." And it came faster than we expected. At 7:52 that night, Gabrielle's phone buzzed. She put it on speaker. The court clerk's voice came through clear and firm. "Judge Harlan has signed the order. Ms. Eliza Thorne is granted immediate residential reinstatement at Meadowlark 247. The Reeves family has issued a no-contact perimeter of 100 meters, effective immediately." Eliza covered her mouth, crying. I stood there listening to the early night rain tapping against the wooden railing, and it felt like I could hear the last chain falling away. Tomorrow, Eliza would walk back into the very home she had been pushed out of, this time as the lawful owner, with an entire neighborhood standing behind her. We were only just beginning. For the first 7 days after the court order, the Meadowlark 2477 house felt like it could finally breathe after 3 years of being strangled. I never believed in something called temporary peace, but this house taught me that sometimes peace doesn't come because the storm is gone. It comes because the storm is inhaling before coming back harder. Even so, we used every minute as if those quiet pockets could heal us. I spent all Monday morning fixing June's room. The stuffed animals I bought before moving to Seattle were still in a box. June stood on her tiptoes, picking them up one by one, her eyes lighting up when she saw the white rabbit she used to hold when she was 2. "I remember this friend," she said, her voice tiny, as if a loud sound might scare the memory away. Eliza leaned on the door frame, her hand brushing the fresh paint on the wall. She said softly, "She never had a real room of her own at Reeves Ranch." One sentence was enough to dim the brightness of the entire newly decorated room. In the afternoon, we planted a row of purple salvia along the fence. That shade of purple was Eliza's favorite since childhood, the color she used to call the standing strong color. I shoveled the soil while Eliza placed each plant into the small holes. June ran around counting each one like she was taking attendance in an invisible classroom. By evening, when June asked if she could call me Grandpa Marin, for the first time after months of distance, I almost couldn't speak. That name, just 2 words, felt like it stamped back the thing I had feared losing most, my place in this family. Eliza also began trauma therapy at UC Health under Dr. Meredith's referral. When she walked into the clinic standing straighter, though still trembling slightly, I understood that true recovery isn't not being afraid anymore. It's still being afraid, but moving forward anyway. But just when I believed we had climbed halfway up the hill of peace, signs of the next storm began creeping in. The first night, I saw the headlights of a strange car passing slowly in front of the house, not stopping, not making noise, but far too slow to be accidental. The second night, the headlights didn't turn on at all. The car was parked about 15 meters away. I stood behind the curtain, my fist clenched so tight my knuckles went white. The third night, there were no headlights, just the sound of an engine turning off in complete silence. I looked out the second-floor window, but the darkness swallowed everything. It could have been a neighbor. It could have been someone else. That doubt seeped into every breath. I decided to recheck the entire camera system I had installed before leaving for Seattle. The backyard camera was old. I grabbed my laptop and connected it to the storage drive. I planned to take a quick look, just to be sure. But only seconds later, the footage from the third night appeared. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. They weren't. Under the faint backyard light, dim but enough to recognize the shape, was Clayton. He wore a black cap and a gray hoodie, and in his hand was a gasoline can. He walked around the backyard as if mapping out the path of fire. He didn't knock, didn't shout, didn't break anything. He just walked in circles, calm to the point of horror, like he had a plan already carved into his mind. I rewound and replayed the footage, but I didn't need more evidence. The piece we had tried to rebuild brick by brick was only the flat surface before the flames. Clayton was preparing to come back, not to claim justice, but to burn down everything he believed had been taken from him. We had never stepped out of the storm. We had only been standing at its edge. That night, Louisville sank into a storm thick as a heavy blanket, draped over the entire Meadowlark block. The wind snapped in violent bursts, carrying the growl of the sky and the sharp smell of ozone. Rain hammered the metal roof like someone frantically tapping out a warning. I couldn't sleep, not because of the storm, but because the camera footage was still burned into my laptop screen. Clayton's shadow carrying that gasoline can around the backyard like a mindless animal sniffing out prey. Around 1 a.m, when the whole neighborhood was drowning under broken thunder, I heard it. The first sound, a faint clink, like glass tapping lightly against glass. Then a second, then a third, sharper. That wasn't branches. That wasn't rain. That was glass. I shot up instantly, my heart tightening in my chest. When I reached the kitchen window, I saw him, gray silhouette under the stormlight. Clayton. He was tilting the gasoline can, pouring along the back porch edge, each line as if outlining an execution. As he worked, he muttered something, his voice shredded by wind, but I caught fragments. No one! Steals! This house again! I stepped back, pulse hammering. No more time. I ran down the hall and threw Eliza's door open. Eliza! Up! Up now! She jolted awake, her face draining of color as soon as she heard the tiny muffled pop somewhere in the backyard. One spark was enough. June began crying from the next room as the smell of gasoline slid through the door cracks. I grabbed her, holding her tight so she wouldn't see whatever was happening outside. Then the explosion shook the floor. Fire burst upward. Flames roared to life like a beast unleashed, racing along the back porch and climbing the wood, as if it had been waiting for this moment. The glow swept across the kitchen ceiling, painting the walls in violent red strokes. Smoke thickened fast, rolling into the room, the burning stench scraping down my throat. I pushed Eliza and June toward the side door. Go! Now! Get to the neighbor's car. Don't look back. Eliza met my eyes and knew exactly what I intended to do. Dad, don't. Go! I barked, not from anger but from terror that even a second of hesitation could cost us everything. They ran out the side door and I turned back toward the backyard. Clayton had used a metal bar to smash through the sliding glass door. Shards fell like a rain of broken stars. He stepped inside through the jagged frame, drenched by rain but eyes blazing. You ruined my family, he screamed, deranged. Now I burn all of it. I grabbed the metal rod nearby, the broken leg of an old table, but I didn't charge him. I blocked the hall entrance to stop him from chasing Eliza and June. Clayton, stop. June is out there. She's your blood, he laughed, warped and hollow. She's not mine. The storm tore open the sky, flooding his face with a flash of cold white light, long enough for me to realize I no longer recognized the man who once called me Dad Marin. He lunged. My rod caught the first swing, but the second shoved me back hard, my shoulders slamming into the cabinet. Smoke burned my eyes. The kitchen began popping with small bursts as the heat climbed. In that moment, I couldn't hear rain or thunder anymore, only my own frantic breathing and Clayton's rabid muttering. You ruined me? Now I ruin you. He swung the metal bar down. I dodged, grabbed his wrist, and yanked him to the floor. Two grown men fought in smoke, fire, and rain blowing in through the shattered door. He was strong, but I had something he didn't, a reason to live. I pinned him just as a massive crash came from the collapsing back section of the house. That scene was caught by the security camera of the neighbor across the street. Mark, who had run onto his balcony after hearing the explosion, and that footage later became gold evidence. As fire trucks and police sirens filled the night, Clayton lurched, trying to run toward the side door, but officers stormed in from both directions, shouting, "Drop the weapon!" Clayton shrieked like an animal cornered, but they tackled him onto the soaked ground, snapping cold cuffs onto his wrists. I leaned against the kitchen wall, shaking not from cold, but from the surge of adrenaline. Firefighters dragged me out just before the back roof partially collapsed. 40% of the house burned, not destroyed, but enough for the entire neighborhood to witness the consequences of the madness Clayton unleashed. When I saw Eliza and June wrapped in emergency blankets, safe in the arms of medics, I knew the worst had passed, but the fight to end this for good, it had only just begun. That morning, Boulder County Court was so crowded, the security officers had to open extra rows of chairs, and people from the neighborhood, those who had seen the red flames rising from Meadowlark, those who had watched the video of Clayton walking around the backyard with a gasoline can, were all there. They weren't there for spectacle. They were there for one thing only: justice. Eliza sat beside me, her hands clasped tightly together, her shoulders trembling slightly from the courtroom's cold air. I placed my hand over hers. Today we finish what he started. Eliza nodded softly, her eyes bright but shadowed by months of exhaustion. When Clayton was brought in, whispers swept through the wooden benches like wind through leaves. An orange jumpsuit, dark circles from sleepless nights, wrists marked by old cuff abrasions. He was no longer the man who stood in my kitchen with a counterfeit smile. He was the man who set fire to a home with a 5-year-old child sleeping inside. Judge Harriet Mallory entered, and she didn't need her gavel for the room to fall silent, like someone had flipped a switch. The trial of Clayton Reeves begins. Gabrielle Ivers stood tall, raising the Meadowlark 2477 file onto the podium. Your Honor, this transfer contract was signed while Ms. Eliza Thorne was in a state of severe postpartum cognitive impairment, under heavy influence of sertraline, clonazepam, and quetiapine, according to UC Health Long's Peak records. She set Dr. Meredith's medical report on the table, the sound of the pages landing like a door being shut on an old room. The Reeves side went silent. There was nothing left to deny. Judge Mallory opened the first page, her voice ringing clear. Based on medical evidence and expert testimony, the court rules that about Meadowlark 2477 transfer contract is fully voided. The lawful owner is Eliza Thorne. Eliza exhaled sharply, gripping my sleeve, and behind us neighbors began to cry softly. People who had once seen her ordered around wearing a Reeves Household Staff apron. The prosecutor rose, voice hard as steel. Clayton Reeves is charged with 4 counts: first-degree arson, attempted assault, fraudulent conveyance, and coercive control. Each charge echoed through the courtroom like a hammer strike. When the judge declared, "The defendant is remanded into custody until sentencing," the lower gallery erupted in applause, not out of joy, but relief, the kind a community feels after witnessing injustice they could not stop. Clayton stared at the floor as officers escorted him away, the white overhead lights exposing every ounce of his guilt. Miranda Reeves shot to her feet, screaming, "We were only helping her." Gabrielle didn't turn around, but her voice sliced the air. "You can explain that in civil court. Being an accomplice to forced labor is real, not helping." Miranda's face drained to ash. Clayton was taken into custody, awaiting sentencing. And the day of that sentence would change everything. Boulder County Court was packed for the sentencing hearing, the air heavy like rain about to break, everyone holding their breath for the final moment, of a tragedy that had dragged on far too long. Eliza sat beside me, her hands trembling slightly, but it was no longer fear. It was the anticipation of a new door opening. When officers escorted Clayton in, he no longer had the swagger or arrogance he once wore. His orange jumpsuit was wrinkled, his eyes sunken, his hands pale as ash. This wasn't triumph. This was the inevitable consequence of everything he had sown. Judge Mallory stepped to the bench, her voice clear and cold like metal hitting tile. Clayton Reeves is hereby sentenced to 14 years in state prison, with a minimum of 11 years to be served before eligibility for parole. A soft, "Oh my God," escaped from the back row. Someone covered their mouth. Some neighbors fell silent. People who had once seen Clayton strut across my porch with entitlement now saw only a man collapsing like a tree with its roots ripped out. But the criminal sentence was only half the story. The prosecutor continued. The Reeves family, Miranda and Ronald Reeves, are ordered to pay $1,200,000 to Ms. Eliza Thorne, including medical expenses, housing damages, emotional harm, and legal fees. Miranda jolted. Ronald practically shot out of his seat. Gabrielle had predicted that reaction. She only gave a small smile. Not cruel, just lawful. The judge signed the order. The Reeves family assets are partially seized, and Reeves Construction is required to liquidate property and settle business loans to fulfill the restitution. The words fell like nails sealing the coffin of the Reeves legacy. A family that once treated controlling Eliza as their right now had to pay with their economic future. Eliza sat still, tears spilling, but not out of sorrow, out of release. I placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're done, Eliza." A few weeks later, she filed for divorce, and around the same time, the restitution process began. Eliza did something no one expected. She created the Thorne Recovery Fund, a small foundation to help women who had been through what she endured: emotional abuse, financial coercion, or being drugged into legal helplessness. She told me on the night it was formed, "I don't want my pain to die useless." I looked at my daughter, the same woman who once couldn't remember her own name for 3 days, now standing as strong as a redwood rising after a wildfire. One late winter morning, I stood in front of the Meadowlark 2477 house being restored, hammering timber, the smell of new paint. And for the first time in years, I exhaled, without feeling pain in my chest. 1 year passed. Louisville stepped into a Colorado-style summer, warm, clear, and carrying that late afternoon honey gold light that poured over every newly repaired board of the Meadowlark 2477 house. The home that once reeked of smoke and was shadowed by years of fear now stood upright, clean and bright, as if it too had been born again. I stood on the new porch, the one we rebuilt with Douglas fir from Wyoming. Sunlight streamed through the widened front window, widened by 8 inches because, as June said, it would let the light come into the house easier. Inside was the soft smell of lavender tea drifting through the air, mixing with the sound of water boiling in the steel kettle Eliza had just set on the stove. In the yard, June rode her bike in circles, her small training wheels wobbling slightly on the new stone path. She laughed out loud, a laugh no longer trembling, glancing toward the gate every few seconds to see whether someone was standing there. There was only wind, the tiny bell of her bike, and the rhythm of fearlessness. Eliza stood by the long wooden table, brewing tea from the leaves Dr. Meredith had sent her when she completed her therapy. My daughter's face was lighter, brighter, carrying a piece I hadn't seen in years. She no longer wore the Reeves Household Staff apron, no longer shrank to the side at the sound of a man's footsteps, no longer bowed her head to apologize for things she had never done wrong. I placed my blueprint folder on the table, Meadowlark Rebuild Project, the design I had spent nearly 8 months refining, window by window, roof arch by roof arch, the back walkway, the freeze-resistant water system, even the auxiliary beams only a technical person would notice. Not to make the house prettier, but to make the house belong to the right person. Eliza looked at the blueprint for a long moment and then said softly, "Dad, I think we finally came back to where we were always meant to be." I didn't answer right away. I watched the golden light sweep across her face, watched June fall off her bike and stand up on her own without crying, watched the purple salvia plants we planted in spring now reaching up to her knees. A family reborn from ash, not by miracle, not by luck, just by a road, long, painful, but straight, from darkness to where light finally arrived. When Eliza brought the tea out to the porch, I said the sentence I had kept inside for an entire year, the closing line of this journey, the motif of Meadowlark itself. Light doesn't lie. It just waits for you to open the door so it can come in. As I stood on the Meadowlark porch on the final evening of this journey, I realized something I never expected. Some battles a father must walk through not to win, but to pull his child back into the light. I had once thought I had lost Eliza. I had once believed that 9 years of distance, and my own mistakes, had ended my place in my daughter's life. But the moment I saw her kneeling on someone else's floor, wearing the Reeves Household Staff apron, I understood that there are moments when only a parent can stand up and say, "No, today you are not alone." This house was rebuilt with new wood, new mortar, new light, but more importantly, it was rebuilt with a promise I made to myself. If the darkness ever comes knocking again, I will be the one to turn on the light first. If our story made you pause for even a heartbeat, if any part made your throat tighten, or reminded you of someone you once wanted to protect, please leave a single, "so I know you are still here," just a single dot. But to me, it means more than you think. And if you want to hear more stories, journeys where justice isn't loud and where the light always finds its way back, please hit subscribe. Thank you for walking with me through this story. From Meadowlark, I'm sending you the kind of gratitude I rarely say out loud.